The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Welcome to tonight's Dukes Court. I'm here with Jefferson Street Chris Fletcher, Gary Kinn, and I'm Dave Mad Dog Finoli. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mad Dog.
Oh,
David?
Mad Dog.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing.
Oh, it is. I've been stopping in the bathroom before we get on the thing, and I look over, and my wife has this bottle. It's called Big Hair Extravaganza, so I try it, and the hopes that my fro just didn't come back. It seems to be a failed venture here, so I'm a little distraught as we start here, but I just wanted to.
More times, maybe it's one of those things that doesn't take right away, Dave.
So you think by next week I could have my fro back?
You might, maybe you could if you use it a number of times. So.
Oh man!
And I was curious. I wonder whatever happened in San Jose's plumbing department after the last.
Oh, we never checked. We never did check.
You need to look into that, I think.
You're going to look into that. Oh man! But anyways, our first subject tonight, we're going to talk about the best commissioners in sports. The ones that can balance the fine line for the owners between what's best for the business end and what's best for their game and the players. My least favorite at this point, personally, is Rob Manfred. There are issues in the game. Baseball is suffering. I agree, Gary, you said several times it'll even itself out, and it will. I mean, the game's too good to have too far down period, but I personally think the leaning too much on the metrics and is something that's killing the game, and the lack of a floor in the salary cap is killing the game because too many teams are just throwing it in to try to be the Astros. But the Astros did a phenomenal job, but it's not an easy thing to do, and odds are, people are going to end up more like the Padres than the Houston Astros doing this. But I think he doesn't look at that. I think he looks at things that have nothing to do with what's troubling the game. The DH in both leagues, it's existed and thrived without having it. I don't know that, tons of people are going to come back to the stadiums or start playing as youth because they can be a DH. Speeding up the game, well, again, we've talked about ways to do that. And I did actually, watching an Indians game on MLB TV the other night, did see that they were actually doing in-inning commercials, which I think is probably the best way to speed up the game. And certainly not ending extra innings by putting a guy in second or all the other controversial things he's doing. I don't think he sees the big picture. I have no confidence he's the right man for the job at this point, and he's on the bottom of the top four in my eyes. I think Goodell, he does some good things. I mean, people get mad at what he does trying to safen up the game, but I think that's a problem. I think youth football participation is down, and if that trend continues, that's going to be a problem for football in the future. So I think he's right to look for ways to make the game safer and try to do in the long-term health of the league. Where he gets me is the lack of control he has over the league and the owners at times. This national anthem thing is just a prime example that if you just shut up about it, and it would have gone away a long time ago. But no, first you had to be bold against the president, who stupidly tried to call out players as pussies, and instead of just letting it go, they protest against them, and then they come back with the Jerry Jones of the world that keep it a big issue. It's an issue that would die if they just let it die. But I think to me that shows maybe he doesn't have the control that a $40 million man needs to get through controversies like that. I think the top two would be Adam Silver. I think he has a great relationship with the players and owners, And if you look what he's done at ESPN, it's almost a 365, 24/7 promotion for the NBA all year round. I think he does what's best for the game. I think, Lord knows I'd love to see the salary cap a little more simplistic. But again, I think the league is healthy. I think he's done a phenomenal job with it. And this, my top of the four, is something that 4 or 5 years ago I'd have laughed if I would have, probably more than that. But Gary Bettman has actually gotten hockey to a point where popularity-wise, it's probably about as popular as it's been. It's with the salary cap, with the rules they've done here and there, it's actually a more exciting game. And we had talked earlier, the Stanley Cup playoffs are becoming something where there's a lot of teams that have a chance to win the cup by the end of the year. And that's due to a lot of the things they did with the rules and due to the salary cap. And when we were growing up, I mean, there were a lot of teams significantly under 500 who made the playoffs because, it was very top-heavy league. Not to mention that that the league certainly, there weren't upsets in that. There certainly were, but more times than not, you'd have the top teams winning. A guy we don't count, and I just want to mention him, who I think probably does the best job of all the professional, is Don Garber of the MLS. I've talked about this before, and what he's done growing that league, it's very profitable. It's now the third largest major North American league in attendance. And he just seems to have done a good job, surprisingly, people have been trying to make soccer preeminent in the United States since 1966. And everybody's failed at it. This guy hasn't made it preeminent yet, but he's cutting in a lot of strongholds with it. He has a strong minor league system, and the game is healthier than it's ever been in my lifetime. We'll name Bettman because we generally are talking the four, but I wanted to throw his name in there because, I think the guy has just done a phenomenal job with it. Gary, what are your thoughts on the subject?
It's funny. I don't know. Maybe it's because we're spending more time together, or maybe we're just all geniuses who think alike, perhaps. But it's funny. I would have put the exact order that you have, with the big four. Now, I don't know much about Garber, but clearly he's doing something right. The game's on TV on both Fox and ESPN on the weekends. It gets prime time with baseball. That was something you never would have predicted 20 years ago. So from that alone, clearly Garber deserves to be in this discussion. I just don't know enough about that league. But, if you would have said that Bettman back in the strike that took place in 2004 and 5, a lot of fans have emotion about it, particularly in Canada. Well, the game shut down. This is our lifeblood, that kind of thing. But, he really was able to take a hard-line position at that time with the Players Association and get most of the owners to agree with him, although that might have been the easier job than what he did, at least as far as shutting the game down. But even going back into the early 90s when he took the job, and, the strike that happened right before the playoffs that year when the Penguins had their run in the Penguins run in 1993, and, the criticism he took from the press at that time, you never would think that we would be in this position. But I have to agree with you fully, Dave. He's managed. Some of the owners that Ilitch and some others that basically, acted like cowboys like they do in baseball are pretty much out of the game now. And some of the ones that ran their franchises into the ground, like Wirtz that wouldn't put the games on TV, they're out of the game as well. His son took over in Chicago, has a totally different attitude. But, in terms of getting, the ownership group together, unified, and I think working through the strike and hiring the right people like Shanahan to look at the rules and change the game and make it more exciting and things like that. It's been an amazing run. Since that shutdown, 13 years ago, this has been a golden era in the NHL. The TV ratings are up. They're pretty much selling near capacity. There's been very little unrest. I do think if you read the tea leaves, fear doesn't seem to have the same sway. In fact, some people in the Players Association hockey want him out. But I think there's going to be a little bit harder fight this time than it was during the last one or two things that they negotiated between the owners and the Players Association because the league is doing so well. And I think a lot of the players, I think they were burned the hardest by losing a whole season, some of them in the prime of their careers. But, memories are short, and I think they're going to argue for a bigger piece of the pie. They're going to argue for a change in the salary cap. So we're going to see how good Bettman really is. I mean, his biggest challenge, I think, coming up is that labor agreement, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's either 2021 or 21-22. So it's not that far off. Now, he does seem to, despite he doesn't come across all that comfortable when he's in front of the press and things like that, or even when he's giving out the Stanley Cup. But I think behind the scenes he seems to be able to get people to talk early enough. I don't get the sense he's going to get steamrolled by fear like Selig did in baseball, because that Players Association is as strong. But I would say right now he would have to be the top one. Silver. You're right about the ESPN deal, and I think you're right internationally. I mean, it's amazing to me. And maybe it's because they're, watching TV shows from the 1970s, and they don't have anything like this. But, I mean, the ratings that the NBA is pulling down in, places like South America and China and places like that, I mean, that really, Stern did a lot of good for the NBA, but he didn't do this kind of thing. And this guy clearly came in, saw that was an opportunity, and he's created even more revenue streams for the NBA than they had before. I mean, I think he's benefiting a little bit by the fact that it seems like anybody under 30, regardless of whether there's a competitive problem in the league, which I think is the biggest problem he faces, with these superstars all going to the same teams. I mean, dynasties do sell, but not when it's the same teams year after year after year like this. I mean, I think there's some teams that have no chance to win in the NBA. You'd probably say that about any sport, but I think there's more of them in the NBA. But, all the moves that he's made, again, not the most comfortable in front of a camera, but definitely seems to, have his pulse on, the fans, particularly younger fans, where other revenue is going to come from and how to sell it. So I'd have to put him up there. Second, I think Goodell, I couldn't agree with you more, Dave. I mean, it sounds like I'm repeating you, but, I mean, I think the whole botching of a couple things, first the whole national anthem thing and making a big deal about it and kind of having, I think, too liberal a view about it. I mean, he basically should have just come out and said, look, this is a team issue. If the teams feel a certain way, the players are employees of the team. Yes, they represent the league. We're not commenting on that. Next question. If he would have done something like that, I don't think we'd be in this mess that I'm sure we're going to start hearing about again even this coming weekend when they induct these guys into Canton and they play that exhibition game. I think, some of the league's reputation has really fallen greatly, too, in terms of some of the people playing in the league and the nature of them. I mean, you can't close your eyes to the Cowboys, continue hiring these characters like Lloyd, who probably should have been in prison, and then making comments like, well, we're trying to win football games. I mean, he may not be able to come out and publicly and do something about that. And I don't care if it's Jones or who it is, and I don't care how successful it is. You got to go to somebody and say, look, we got an image to uphold here, okay? We're asking for sponsors, things like that. Just be thinking about what you're doing. And if you're going to do it, would you keep it quiet? He hasn't done a particularly good job of that. But, the league's revenues are huge. The ratings are huge. He's done a lot of things right, too, and he probably doesn't get enough credit for that he should. And, clearly I think in baseball, we've talked about this many times, I'm really a little bit confused by some of the reasons, the way Manfred looks at things. We all know, we talked about this, the game's got some pretty significant problems that are not going to be fixed by some of this goofy tinkering. I mean, I think the shifts will be fixed. Morris made some comments about that in his speech, I think, over the weekend. I think I read or heard. At least he was interviewed beforehand. I think he's right. I think it's up to the teams to draft a little bit better, prepare a little bit better that way. If a guy's going up there and he's just hacking for the fences like Chris Davis, he's at 152, then you got to make a move. You either got to eat that contract or put somebody else in there. I mean, they put themselves in these kinds of positions. They built these junky little ballparks, too, that are like Major League parks with no foul territory. So, I mean, he could do some things that would speed up the game that would be much more immediate than some of the stuff that we're talking about. I'm not even sure I care about counting visits to the mound. I'm not really sure 9 of them is limiting enough. Dave, like you said, maybe it's a matter of going back and just reducing the amount of relievers per inning. But the biggest thing to me is the strike zone. I mean, I'm tired of kowtowing to the Umpires Association. We're all in this together. I don't want to hear about your ego with your strike zones the size of a postcard. Letters to the knees. And if you don't do it, you're going to be out. Period. Well, I got a contract. Well, but that's the rules. Okay, so call it by the rules. If you're not going to call it by the rules, we have grounds to change this. I mean, to me, if he did that, the offense would go way up. The games would speed up. They might still try to go to 19 relievers, but using a reliever every day because you haven't put together a proper pitching staff, it's going to catch up with you. Again, it'll even out itself. But, I mean, he just does not seem And honestly, a lot of this stuff just seems feigned. You know, the first year on July the 4th or, you know, whatever day, Memorial Day, you know, you had some colored hats and all this kind of stuff. That was fine. But now, like what's going to be next? It's National Garden Day, so everybody's going to wear green uniforms. I mean, knock it off. Okay, it's not going to change the attention in the game. It's not going to get a whole bunch of people to set up and say, okay, I'm going to go for that. You know, it's National, you know, Save the Praying Mantises Day. I mean, it's not going to work. Okay, stop this nonsense. And honestly, I don't think half that money goes to the causes at the ratios it should be anyway with the money. Right? So I would certainly.
If you look at the NFL, I forget what it was a couple of years ago. Somebody looked into how much of the pink goes to cancer research, and it was embarrassingly low. So you're pretty much on point there. If they're claiming, and there was a controversy over Francona's kid. I believe he was with the Mets, questioning how much of all this veterans garb that everybody sells and wears actually goes to help veterans. And they fired him, but never answered the answer, or never answered the question.
And I don't mind some of it. I mean, but every single, I mean, we've got 6 or 7 things a year now where we're doing this. It just doesn't, it doesn't make sense to me. So.
And every Thursday here, I don't know how it is in other parks, but every Thursday here is Camo Day at the park.
You know, I'm not suggesting that we don't honor people that do that. I don't do that.
No.
And they are giving us an opportunity, but at some point, I think even people who wear those colors or serve somewhere start to say, okay, what are we doing here? Like, I mean,
exactly. And those are the ones that, at least from the ones I talked to, seem the most frustrated from it. Because if you're going to do it, give the money to the causes. I'm all for that. I got no problem with it. If you're going to do it just to bump your own revenues up by it, then no, that's wrong. I mean, Francona should have questioned that. Well, we should all question that. Everybody should question that. If you're making this claim, you know, is it going to come out like what came out with the NFL? I mean, to me, that was embarrassing. When that percentage, it was in the teens, which is ridiculous.
But he doesn't have touch with so many things, it seems. He's the worst at being in touch. Silver clearly was in touch with the younger crowd who thinks the NBA is just the all-end-all. You know, Bettman seemed to realize that the game had some pretty significant problems, and a lot of teams were really in shape, so he helped fix it. You know, Goodell came into a pretty good operation anyway. He's kind of maintained it. He seemed to botch a couple things PR-wise, but he still kind of handles the league pretty well. Half the things that come out of Manfred and this leadership group Fletch, you said a couple weeks ago, it really, you know, with games that are 3.5 hours or 3:40 for 9 innings and all of those things, I mean, you got to fix that stuff instead of worrying about some of this other causes and that kind of thing in my view. Right. And I think if you did that, I think all that stuff will fix itself. But, you know, putting runners on base, this isn't midget ball. You know, I mean, I think it's nonsense. And you know, taking the shifts away, I mean, it probably has driven the offense down. I mean, I think the thing that's really driven the offense down the most is the fact that these guys are coming out of the pen now. Even the middle relievers throwing a ball 95 miles an hour, you're just not going to hit that consistently. So I don't know. I mean, in 1968, you lowered the mound, right? So do it again. You know, I mean, you know, do it again, making sure they're not throwing the ball down the same plane. I mean, I don't think it's that hard of a fix. I think if you make the strike zone wider and you do some of that kind of stuff, and maybe you limit the fact that you can't go to 6 guys to get 3 outs, all of a sudden then the game starts to get a little bit more offensive, and it's not just a standing around. But, you know, it's funny, all that talk, if you guys noticed this, all this talk about how bad the attendance was, did you notice the crowds over the July 4th week and the week after? There were monstrous crowds in a number of cities. So, I mean, you know, this is another media creation to me that keeps saying, the game's in such trouble, there's a lot of empty seats. Yeah, it was a bad spring. It was a very bad spring, April and May. But, you know, a lot of that bounced back once the weather got better, kids are out of school. It always does. I don't think it's quite the same position as bad. And I'm not rooting. I just don't think it's as bad as a lot of people see it. That's all.
Fletch, you used to make fun of me when I'd insist on a runner playing wiffle ball. But... You know, how do you see the commissioners?
Well,
do you think
let me comment.
A potential change for it?
Yeah, well, let me comment on one thing that you said. You know, blaming the NFL for the things around cancer. They had a partnership with the Susan Komen Foundation, and they are notoriously bad. They're like one of the worst charities you ever want to give to, in terms of making sure that the money actually goes where it it's needed. So it's on the NFL doing their homework, but it's also on the Komen Foundation. I mean, that is an organization that frankly I would never support. Having done a lot of time in nonprofits, that is the worst of the worst.
Well, that's a good point. That's great.
They seem to they want more. They more want attention here, Fletch, than they do for the cause, in my view.
I agree. I think we're past the time of doing awareness for cancer. You know, we know, and people are making the decisions to get checkups and all of that. But let's change the dialogue on that.
Right.
So let me get through my commissioners here. So,
all right.
While I agree with some of the things you said, I have a hard time getting past the fact that Bettman is a buffoon. I really do. I mean, there's been a lot of great things he's done with the league, but when you come out and say that there's no credible link between concussions and CTR, you lost me right then and there. And the league needs to step up its efforts there. Goodell, one word for him is he's a villain. He's among the most evil and well-paid human beings on the planet today. He's botched a career's worth of scandals every year. You know, he's an artist who uses building mistrust as his canvas. You know, unfortunately, though, his ruling of the NFL has made them a ton of money, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. Manfred, I'm going to use a word that Dave, you and I are trying to get back into the lexicon. He is a busher. There's no other word I could use. He's a busher, and as you said, he's a floater. You know, he should keep his eye on the ball, to use a little baseball term there. But you know, putting things out there, just seeing if he could really tinker with the game, where he's not addressing what the issues are. And you know, when we come to our sports story of the week, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that. So we call that a tease here in the podcast business, fellas. That was a tease. Adam Silver, big props for his handling of the Donald Sterling affair. But, you know, Gary, you mentioned the big problem that I see, and that's competitive balance that needs to be addressed. You know, you think, and you know, I hate to keep going back, hearkening back to the old days, but do you think that you could ever imagine a time where Magic Johnson said, "Oh, Larry Bird beat us in the finals. I'm going to go join him next year"? Not going to happen. It was a different level of competition, and you know, I love dynasties, but I don't like super teams where they're being recruited by each other. Maybe that's just my distinction, but I don't mind a team that drafts well and puts together a team like that. But whenever you have that open lobbying of superstars to go play with each other, it just bothers me. I mean, I think of baseball too. I'm going to do another old timer story. When Bill White and Bob Gibson were teammates, when Bill White got traded and he faced Gibson, in fact they were roommates on the road. The first time that Bill White faced Gibson at the plate, Gibson drilled him, and Bill White knew it was coming. There was no doubt in his mind that was going to happen. So it's just a whole different type of competition. I agree with you, Gary. He's done a hell of a job, and Dave, with getting the NBA to be part of ESPN and to really grow the fan base and to grow it internationally. So for me, he's the top of the commissioners. He also had really big shoes to fill. I mean, David Stern really did a lot. He saved that league. I mean, if you remember back in the 80s, they were doing the NBA championship on tape delay.
Mm-hmm.
So we wouldn't be watching that until 11:30.
Yeah. That was after the news it would come on.
Yep.
So, I mean, he you know, having Bird and Magic come out really helped with that effort. But, I mean, he really resurrected that league. But in my mind, fellas, the real power in sports commissioners is at the college level with the conference commissioners of the power conferences. You know, they're sort of like CEOs. They negotiate the TV deals. They have CEO responsibility. They're setting agendas. They're pushing policy. They're building consensus. They're maintaining diplomatic relations with other commissioners, and they're delivering sort of their stockholders meeting all the time. And they also have the headaches. You know, I mean, they have the disputes they have to mediate. They have scandals they have to navigate. The disciplinary action that falls on them, and because the college universities, they spend maybe, you know, less than 5% of their time on the sporting programs. So these commissioners have a lot of power.
Yeah. they certainly do.
I agree.
You look at the revenues the Big Ten and the SEC has generated over their stations, their channels. I mean, it just boggles my mind how you talk about major league teams who dog it and cut payroll. You get the same thing in that conference of teams that just they suck up the money and don't spend it to try to improve the product. But I mean, there's a league that is, for the most part, has done a great job of mixing academics and athletics, and I mean the millions each school reaps from there is just mind-boggling. So that is a great point.
The only advantage they have is they don't have to negotiate long-term $1 million investments, for something that could break a leg tomorrow. And they don't have some of the labor. The college athletes just don't have the labor strength that you have in professional sports. But, I mean, in terms of what you said, though, Fletcher, you're right when you think about it. In terms of revenue, those things probably equal some of the professional sports in revenue. They got a lot more decisions to make. They got a lot more balls to juggle versus trying to be somewhat reasonable academically and not having scandals happen. And when they happen, they're pretty ugly ones too. So it is a different animal. And I agree with you. I mean, that is a very hard job, and they may have actually more power, but they don't have the labor strife or traditionally the labor challenge because of who plays the games.
But the downfall, and this isn't on the commissioners. The commissioners in college are a different animal because they're strictly business. They probably, whereas they offer their opinion, probably aren't as concerned on how the game as a total is played, and that's part of the problem. Is there really is no rule anymore on how the game is played. I mean, the SEC. At one point in time, just about every major SEC team has been on probation, but nobody knows it because there's no real fouls that are come against the school.
Right.
So that's my big problem with it. And again, that's not the commissioners who have anything to do with that. That's the NCAA presidents. But that is a sport that is in desperate need of a commissioner. Maybe splitting the Power 5 to one division and everybody else can go for others because, for the most part, I mean, you get the occasional butlers in basketball, and I would consider the Big East the power conference in basketball.
Yep.
So a Power 6, but I would have no problem if they split off into their own division but make rules that all 5 or 6 conferences can utilize. Not that the SEC is going to go one way with their academic requirements and the Big Ten goes another, because as successful as they've been, I think that's why they have trouble at the end closing the deals, because they don't have the restriction, or they have restrictions that the SEC I don't believe has.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that'll correct it is, we have a little bit of a situation there with one team winning 5 times in 9 years?
Yeah.
But the SEC's appeared in that championship game, was it 7 of the 9 or 8 of the 9?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you got a situation there where eventually there's going to be a correction. You would hope that some of the other schools say, look, you got to make this playing field a little more level, because it isn't. But it kind of feels like the NFL a little bit. I mean, football just seems to never cease to lose. I mean, the ratings are down a little bit for the NFL, but they're not for college football.
No.
People keep going to it, both live gate and on TV. Ratings are huge. Everybody's really making money. Everybody's kind of happy, even with that.
Except the players.
Yeah, except the players.
Yeah, that's a whole other ball of wax. But as many inroads as they've made, they're still nowhere near making any money. You would just hope at some point they'd allow them to at least make money off their likeness, off their jerseys, things like that.
That seems to me to be a very reasonable thing. And also loosen up some of the rules. I mean, some of these kids are coming from pretty rough areas, and they don't have money to buy food. They can't. It's just they really need to address it. I mean, there's enough money going around that the players need to be taken care of, I think. And, you can say what you want about the value of the education. Of course, the way that the value of an education is being inflated. And I don't know, Dave, you've gone through that recently too with the sticker shock for college, but you got to look at this. You got to change it up a little bit.
Well, yeah, no, that's absolutely. I mean, and that's a bigger problem beyond athletics. I mean, we are in a state that has 11 of the top 20 most expensive public state colleges, which is more of a state that is inept at running a state college system.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of kids going there who have no reason to be in college. They're there to get their draft grades up, and that could be taken care of simply by creating a minor league system in football and basketball. Which
but here's the thing, Dave. In that, I don't think either the NBA or the NFL want any part of that because it doesn't cost them anything.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah. They have a cheap minor league system now. Why pop the money in?
That's right. I mean, I don't see it happen. I mean, they tried that. I mean, Thomas didn't know what he was doing when he ran that CBA and said he wanted 100 teams for some ridiculous number. But I mean, even then, that CBA was in really remote places where there really wasn't a lot of other entertainment options, and the league never made money. Even going back to the Eastern League. So, I mean, I think honestly that's where a little bit more organized leadership of the whole thing. I mean, education actually, I don't care if you go to LSU or you go to Harvard, there's a lot of value to it, but somebody has to tell you that for a lot of it.
Right.
And, putting somebody in school and just saying, hey, just play football, and that's all you're encouraging, or some of the North Carolina stuff, I mean, you got to penalize that stuff heavy. I mean, there has to be somebody that North Carolina should have suffered severe penalties for some of that stuff.
Yep.
Now, basketball is not as physically punishing as football is, but still, I mean, you obviously had no concern at all for those guys' future. Now, McCants coming out when he did was also self-serving. I mean, if he was that bothered by that, why didn't he say something when he was there or right after he came out? He waited till he got his NBA signed deal, and he was a mediocre player in the pros, and then he came back and said, well, now I can't read. It's North Carolina's fault. Baloney on that, too. But I kind of blame the institutions more for it. I mean, I'm not sure if you're playing football, you're going to be studying, brain surgery. But on the other hand, you should be encouraged to, get your degree because you never know what could happen down the road. And the schools that don't do it, there should be some penalty for that. So,
Well, and the fact there was no penalty, and I still haven't seen Miami really take a hard penalty for what they were doing down there. That just shows you right now that there is. I mean, in the day, these schools would be on probation for 2 or 3 years, be not allowed to be in a bowl game, be not allowed to be in a tournament, and there would be financial ramifications for this. That's not there anymore. I mean, how does North Carolina get away with this? It's the most egregious thing I've ever seen a college. The president should be fired. Everybody should be fired there. The coaches should be fired for allowing it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yep, I'm with you. But unfortunately, that's where the commissioner's strength and each one of those commissioners and the amount of money that some of those leagues are making for college sports in general. I don't necessarily it's a blind eye, but certainly the penalty is not severe enough. The ACC would survive. The ACC would survive if North Carolina was put on probation for 2 years. Well, that's the part that I have a hard time sorting out in my head. I don't think the ACC would not draw big crowds for basketball or football, even if something happened. Where the SEC wouldn't for football if you put Mississippi on probation for 3. I mean, SMU had a tremendous program when we were all in college, and they were doing a whole bunch of stuff, giving people cars, and they gave it the death penalty, and it's never recovered.
No,
so that may be too extreme, but we need something in the middle, I think.
Well, you look at Louisville, who basically fired Rick Pitino and hired his top assistant. I mean, it's laughable.
It is. It is. It absolutely is. I mean, and that's the kind of thing that you can't. I don't think it doesn't seem to matter. I guess people just look at it as an entertainment option.
Yeah.
But if that causes the competitive imbalance to get too wide, which I think. Saban, maybe he's a great coach, maybe that's a great program and all that kind of stuff, but it kind of feels like, you're going to have to kind of derail that a little bit. And that goes back to, I think, the point that you guys are making about the power of these commissioners, I think. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
But no, that was a great point, Fletch. I mean, those guys certainly are among the most powerful, if not the most powerful. But we talk about Manfred. I think we can all assume he is as the kids of not the last generation, but some generation. He is a tool. I don't think that was our generation that came up with that.
He's a pusher. Come on, Dave. Embrace it. Bring it back.
I apologize, Fletch. He's a busher. Heard that. Busher. We're bringing it. But he resides over a sport that inducted 6 Hall of Famers, which had to be a record speech time for those that attended. Usually 1 or 2, and out of those 1 or 2 that are there, usually somebody's grandson is there for a guy from the 1800s because the electorate doesn't see fit to usually elect more than 1 or 2 players at a clip. But it's always a great time, seemingly a great time in Cooperstown, and by far, in my eyes, one of the, not one of the, but the best Hall of Fame by far of the different sports. But so we got some good coming in this year. Next year we have for the Veterans Committee. One of the, and again, I'm not a huge fan of the Veterans Committee. I think rehashing these guys time and time again, either make a decision on them, because most of the guys you're talking about are very good players, but they generally are a little short of the Hall of Fame as far as the Veteran Committee for the most part. This year's one we're going with is the Today's Game level of players, which is 1988 and beyond, which again, I'm not quite sure, why we're doing that with some more common players. The list includes Harold Baines, which to me is out of this group probably the one most deserving of going in, almost 3,000 hits. He was extended as a DH, which I have a little problem with, but he's probably the closest to there. Albert Bell, dynamite in a steroid era for a short period of time. I don't think he has the career statistics to be included there. Will Clark, again, I think he's a guy who's very good, not a great player. Same can say with Oral Hershiser, who's in there. McGuire, who got a shot a couple of years ago when they brought this committee up. Again, that's one of those borderline things that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, so we won't rehash that. But in the guys that I really look at who deserves to go in that hasn't, was in this last group. Dave Parker, in my mind, he said, I was talking to Sam Rich, who did a chapter on the Pittsburgh drug trials for our book, Unlucky 21. I was talking to him the other day, and he was talking a little about Parker and said, Dave Parker told me once that when I asked him if he deserves in the Hall of Fame, he said, well, if I'm not in, I'm the best player who's not in. Which, again, Parker always had a little bravado about him, but you look at it, I agree with him. I think, here's a guy who for years was the best player in baseball, so he has the peak value that people look for. Whereas he hasn't hit any of the levels such as 500 homers, 3,000 hits. He's come damn close to it. He certainly was a great defensive player in right field, as shown by his arm in the 79 All-Star game. Yes, he's not in there in my mind because of his problems with cocaine during the drug trial era and the fact he was an asshole to the media, which seems to have some bearing when you look at guys like an Al Oliver, who Bill James, in his book, Whatever Happened to the Hall of Fame, projected he was going to be in the 1990s, and certainly never has. So to me, he's probably the player out there I think deserves in, but probably isn't. But the guy who I think should be in that Hall of Fame, and as a crime he's not, is Marvin Miller. Marvin Miller changed sports. He changed how the game is played. To me, there is no bigger figure in baseball over the last 50 years, and in essence, the way all sports are conducted now, than Marvin Miller. And he was a guy who certainly wasn't easy for him to do what he did. Basically break a system that had been around for 80, 90 years. And I just don't understand why he's not in at this point. He'll get another opportunity, I believe, in the modern era, which comes again the year after. So it'll be for the 2020 election. So he'll get another shot next time, as will Parker. And hopefully they'll get in. But I look at, people, you always get the thought about Dick Allen. You get the thought about Gil Hodges. Great players, but to me, they're great players. They're in the Hall of Great, not the Hall of Fame. Edgar Martinez will probably get in this year. To me, is not a guy who I think is good enough for the Hall of Fame. If I'm saying two people that should be there that aren't there, to me it's Dave Parker and Marvin Miller, with Marvin Miller being the one who deserves the most. Fletch?
Well, I'm going to agree with a lot of what you said. To me, the biggest crime about Marvin Miller is that he wasn't inducted while he was still alive. That to me is a shame. I have Parker on that list as well. You think about him. Remember, after he left the Pirates, he also had a second act with the Reds from 85 to 87, where he was averaging 30 homers and 113 RBIs and a 280 batting average. So, I think he should be there. But my list is going to be a little bit longer than yours, Dave.
Please.
So I have Dale Murphy on that list. In the 80s, he played every game for 4 straight seasons. He had 2 MVP awards, 7 All-Star games, an armload of Golden Gloves and Silver Slugger awards. He ranked second only behind Mike Schmidt with 308 home runs in the decade, and he ranked second to Eddie Murray in RBIs during that decade. And the only reason he ranked second is he didn't have a lot of guys on base for him to knock in. So, but the other thing that tells you a little bit about how over important the RBI stack could be. Also on my list is Tony Oliva. If you look at his first 8 seasons, he won 3 batting titles. He led the league in hits 5 times and doubles 4 times. And the most impressive part is he spent the bulk of his career during one of the greatest ages for pitchers in baseball history, the 1960s. So, knowing what we know today, I think he may have been a tad bit underrated in his day. The other person I put in there is Dick Allen. You mentioned him. 351 homers, 292 batting average. That's hard to overlook. And he also had the 4th best OPS of any eligible player not enshrined. So we knew there was something special at the plate. But, with him, he had some baggage. And stats don't tell the whole story for him.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a surprise one, Dave. I also, by the way, I did have Al Oliver in there. 2,700 hits, 303 lifetime batting average.
I think he belongs. I agree. I think he belongs. And Oliva, I definitely agree with too.
Jim Cott, 283 wins, 16 Golden Gloves, 25 seasons, 4,500 innings. So I'm going to give you this stat, Dave. There are 27 pitchers in the history of the game who've pitched that many innings, and 23 of them are in the Hall of Fame. So I definitely think he belongs. And Joe Jackson, Pete Rose, just put an asterisk. They belong there.
Yeah.
And the person I think who really has, you mentioned the steroid era, the one I feel bad for is Fred McGriff. He should be in there.
Yeah. But my problem with Jim Cott is, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but I always look at a guy like Don Sutton, who made it on just longevity of career. I probably am. I know a lot of people are out there who are fans of putting a guy in because of longevity, and I can see their point. But to me, Don Sutton was rarely one of the best pitchers in the game. in any given season. And it kind of feels that way with a Tommy John or a Jim Cott, where they were good.
Well, for me, what pushes Cott over are the Gold Gloves, because I agree with everything you just said. That to me is just the fact that he did that, and he was a dependable innings eater, no matter where he was.
Yeah, he certainly was. Well, I'll throw this one at you, and then we'll throw it over to Gary for thoughts. I would also put one guy, and I forgot about him in my original thought, but Minnie Minoso.
Oh, yeah. I can get behind that.
He had some excellence in certainly in the Negro Leagues to go along with his excellence in the majors, and I don't think people take that into consideration enough when considering him. I agree. I certainly think he should, but I mean, there's certainly a lot of intriguing guys you threw in there. As I said, Oliva's one that we've talked about before, and he completely slipped my mind. But yeah, I agree with you. I think he's underrated, and that's a great point about those who say Mazeroski doesn't belong in, because if you look at him, he led all National League second basemen in hits, home runs, RBIs in the 60s in a low-hitting era and in a bad park. And I think he would have acceptable Hall of Fame numbers, had he played in the 70s in Three Rivers Stadium in his peak. I think he could have been a 20 to 25 consistent home run guy in a park that was not so difficult to hit a home run in. So that's a great point about the 60s. I always use that as an argument why Mazeroski, on top of the fact he in my mind is the greatest defensive second baseman of all time. Anyways, Gary, what's your thought on it?
I mean, I have some similar names here and just a couple others. I mean, it's funny, Fletch, I had Oliva too. I think Tony's problem was he played in Minneapolis, where nobody really saw him in those days, and he
got hurt
with the language, and he struggled with the English language a little bit.
Yes, he did.
So I think those two things really hurt him, but he would be in my list. He wouldn't necessarily be my first one, but he was one of the names I listed here. And it's funny, Dave, your point about the longevity. I don't think longevity is the only answer, but to me, that's a key criterion. I think, you can't just have 1 or 2 years, or you can't just be part of a famous double play combination, because somebody wrote about it in the New York Times in 1909 and be inducted.
Yeah.
Or Phil Rizzuto, fine. He's a friendly guy. What is he doing in there? He doesn't belong in there. So, I mean, to me, longevity on some of the names you mentioned, Fletch, and I have a number of similar ones, does matter. It's not the only longevity and mediocrity doesn't matter. But generally, you don't have longevity if you're mediocre. So, that's the thing with guys like Murphy and some of those guys, 18, 19 years you're playing. I mean, that tells you something to me. That's one of my key criteria. And another thing to me is dominance in an era. And to me, that's why Parker belongs in there. I mean, in an era from 1976 to 1980, and then again, being a factor, in the Reds in the late 80s. I mean, he was a dominant player in 2 different eras. I mean, his statistics may not be the greatest, but that's not the only answer. I mean, Tomey hit 612 home runs, and he's a good guy. He was a great guy here. Is he better than a lot of the guys we're talking about here? Would you much rather have Parker or Jim Tomey? I'd much rather have Parker.
Okay.
All right. So, I mean, I think to me, some of this stuff is subjective, and this is where this numbers craziness has gone off the rail. But, I mean, if you look at some of the guys that you mentioned, I mean, Parker won 2 batting titles. I think he won 2 or 3 Gold Gloves. He hit 339 homers. He had a lifetime average of 290. How many guys can boast that kind of resume? I mean, he belongs in there whether he was lousy with the media or not. It's not a personality contest. These writers need to get over themselves, okay? You're not God here. You're voting on whether – was Parker one of the most dominant players from 1975 to 1990? You're damn right he was. Same with Murphy. I mean, Murphy basically came to that Atlanta organization. It was terrible. They won a couple pennants while he was there. They didn't win as many in the latter part of his career. But again, 18 years. Yeah, he only hit 265, but 398 lifetime homers, 1,300 RBIs. I mean, that's far better than a lot of guys that are in there now for whatever reason. I mean, how can he not be in there? I couldn't agree more on McGriff, Fletch. You talked about that in the past. I mean, here's a guy that never had any stain of the era he was in. 19 years, 493 homers, 1,550 RBIs, 285. I mean, on a bunch of teams, he was in the middle of the order. How could he not be in there? I I mean, I'd like somebody to explain to me how he can't be in there versus some of the people in there from the past or even the current era. You know, two other names I think that are in there, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that they both played in L.A., but I think they both got to deserve consideration. To me, going back to the dominance of an era, there's nobody you wanted to see less than Hershiser from like 86 through 90. And, you know, he won 204 games over a career in an era where hardly anybody did that. And nobody's going to do it going forward. I mean, his earned run average is a little high at 348, but he could pitch in relief. He was a dominant pitcher in the postseason. He was better in the postseason. He played about 16 or 17 years himself. I honestly think he's got to go in there. And the other one, although one-dimensional player, but we don't seem to be bothered by that if we're even talking about guys like McGuire or even Thome to a degree. I mean, Jeff Kent had more home runs as a second baseman than anybody else did. 377, he drove in 1,500 runs, and he hit 290. He won an MVP, and he hit in the middle of the order in a position that, if you look across the Hall of Fame, if you want to go numbers hungry, there's no reason that Kent shouldn't be in there. He wasn't a great fielder, and he wasn't a great base runner, but certainly on the offensive side, and for a long period of time, I think he probably played about 15 years. I mean, you know, it's kind of hard to argue why he shouldn't be in there and why he's not considered.
Well, and you know, it's a lot of his attitude.
I think that's right. I think it's the same thing as Parker. I mean, he certainly wasn't a guy that anybody liked. You know, but that's not. I mean, then what's Henderson doing?
I agree. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, what's Henderson doing in there? I mean, you talk about a complete egomaniac, talk about himself all the time, treat the press bad and everything else. I mean, his numbers are staggering with the stolen bases and the runs and the leadoff homers and stuff. But I mean, we got to check that stuff at the door. I mean, I don't like Hershiser very much either. I don't like him as an announcer. You know, how many times watch the Dodger games, me this, me that. I don't want to hear that. But on the field, for a 4-year, 5-year period of time, he was the dominant pitcher in baseball. And to me, that's got to be considered when you're talking about a Hall of Fame career. And two others to me that kind of changed the game a little bit and had that same kind of run. You know, Valenzuela only had 173 wins. He did pitch 16 years. He had 6 straight All-Star appearances, a Cy Young, and a Rookie of the Year in the same year. You know, and here's a guy that won 20 a couple times. He changed the game, particularly making the game a little bit more popular in some other countries. Not sure he deserves consideration, but he should be getting some more consideration than he's probably been getting. And to me, although none of the numbers are staggering, with the game that we're in now, you talk about changing the game. Tekulve changed the game a little bit. I mean, you know, he worked over 90 games 3 times. Over 70 games 4 times. He had a 16-year career. He worked 1,100 games. He changed the way bullpens were used. Right. So, I mean, I think he deserves more consideration. He's got to. He may not be the most statistically dominant guy. He doesn't have the saves of Suter or Hoffman and some of those guys. Those guys wouldn't be doing what they were doing if guys like Tekulve didn't arise and weren't used as heavy as they were in the late 70s and 80s. So I think he should get some consideration as well. Now, I'm not sure those latter two belong in there, but they never get talked about. And I don't understand why. So to pick, then I'd pick Kent, McGriff, Parker. I agree with Murphy, Hershiser, if they were putting a group in from the group that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of, certainly a lot of arguments for some of these people, and the point you make, Gary, is good. They should at least. You should have good, open dialogue on some of these guys, which I'll take to the next point to manager. You should have good, open dialogue on Danny Murtaugh and give him a more serious
I agree.
conversation in the process.
Yep.
But, to me, it's the most interesting Hall of Fame to talk about, but it's also the most flawed as far as the election process.
But the one thing I will say, Dave, they did something smart this time. It's always great when you have a larger Hall of Fame class.
I agree. Nothing was worse than a couple years ago when wasn't everybody dead that they put in a couple years ago when nobody was elected?
You got nobody.
How bad was that?
Live, yeah.
That's a black eye for them. For what's supposed to be one of your premier weekends of the season. That was just. To me, that says we need to stop the way we have this election process.
Yes.
And, I would even go as far as to pick 1 or 2 guys every year like the NFL does as a veteran committee. Let's focus on 1 or 2 guys, discuss it. And generally, the fact that they've put so much effort into picking that 1 or 2 guys, that's why they make it in 80% of the time.
Right.
this constant arguing the same 20 guys every year, and then, I don't know. Jack Morris, I can see him. I thought he was one of the dominant pitchers of his era in a non-pitching era. But Alan Trammell, to me, again, I don't think he belonged in before Dave Parker. I think he's a borderline Hall of Fame candidate at best, and I would not have taken him over Dave Parker if that was the choice.
I mean, that position has some of the biggest controversies in it, whether you go back to the turn of the century. But, I mean, to me, I don't know how you guys feel. I was curious about how you guys feel about that. I mean, look, like I say, Tommy was a great guy, and he hit 600 lifetime home runs, so it's hard not to put him in. He was kind of a one-dimensional player, let's face it. And I don't quite understand why he's in there over some of these guys either. Now, maybe it's just because his time came up. I don't have any issue at all with Jones. He was a dominant player. A lot of people didn't like the guy. He kind of had a little bit of an attitude to him, but he was a tremendous player. He was on a bunch of great teams. Morris, I think, was a dominant pitcher. Guerrero didn't get a lot of attention because of where he played, but he could beat you anyway. His numbers are pretty damn good over his career, too. And, I mean, Hoffman was, he was lights out for a lot of his career. He also pitched in a place a lot of people didn't see him. But Tommy and Trammell, to me, were borderline. But, I mean, there's no way, if you look at, in terms of dominant player, Parker and him, there's no comparison at all for what Parker accomplished. I mean, there's just no comparison at all. But
if you're going to put in a one-dimensional player, then I think you need to talk about Maury Wills. I mean,
changing the game. I had him on my list.
Changed the game in the 60s.
Yep. No,
I agree with you.
He should get serious conversation at this point. And he would, if I'm not mistaken, 2020 is when his era comes in.
Okay.
So I'm looking at that. He's a little.
Him and Tekulve, to me, changed the thinking about what you had to focus on in the game. And I think Wills, what Wills did seems to be fading a little bit. But there for a long period of time, boy, from that 1962 when he stole the 104 all the way through probably the late 80s and the running Cardinals under Herzog. There was a 30-year period. That was a major part of the game. Wills
was
one
a fun part of the game.
Yep.
But
Wills influenced that.
I'll say one more on top that I would consider before Tekulve is Roy Face. I think Roy Face was the pioneer of the modern-day reliever, and certainly, to me, was the dominant one over a long period of time. And he gets no consideration whatsoever.
Nope.
I would think he would garner a lot more, but.
I think you're right, Dave, 100%. I think the more they keep talking about guys like Dick Allen and Hodges in the same discussion, it almost gets like a smell to it. So their chances go down. Yeah. Better off making a decision on them early or not, just waiting a period of time and then go back and have a committee that really understands this stuff, saw them, and that kind of stuff, and vote again. Because you bring them up 15 times in a row. I mean, that's what's killed Hodges. Hodges has comparable numbers to a lot of guys in there.
He does.
But he's gotten killed, I think, because he failed so many times. And then I guess people look around and like anything else and say, well, nobody else voted for him. Maybe I shouldn't either. And I think it ends up hurting the guy's chances. Well,
the other thing that happens, I think he has part of that Steeler backlash as well. And there's a lot of those Brooklyn Dodgers that are in the Hall. And I think that there's a little bit of a backlash on that as well. But, the thing I think to me, he was borderline, but maybe what pushes him over across his time as a manager as well.
Yep. I mean, certainly one of the more miraculous jobs, and that Met team was talented, but it wasn't like dynasty talented. So he
beat a dynasty.
Yeah, he did a hell of a job. But we'll break in now to our speed round here, our memorable moments of the week. And mine is Neil Huntington playing the part. I forget the woman's name that owned the Cleveland Indians in the movie Major League. You and I talked about this, Fletch. But Neil Huntington became that owner, making the challenge to the players. Well, you want me to keep you together, you have to have a big week. Now, Fletch, I know you don't want to think of Neil Huntington and pasties having one section taken off his cardboard figure every time the team wins. But
that's frightening.
I'm saying, but he made that same kind of challenge, and that team responded. And Neil Huntington has a big conflict now. Neil Huntington, in my eyes, wanted to break this team up. They wanted to do what they always do, try to maintain status quo without becoming too big where it become extensive. But this team said no. So now he's in a position now where he's having to go out and buy. And the name that was brought up today, and if he does this just to make a trade, they talk about Gaussman and Gibbons from the Orioles, which in the first place, I don't know why the hell people are looking at a 280 team and trying to give them good prospects for guys that really suck this year. And Gaussman, I look at his stats, I don't see anywhere where he's any better than what they have in the starting rotation. And Gibbons, again, he might take over for Rodriguez, but, am I really wanting to give up a Brian Hayes or a Cruz so I can get a guy who's my fourth reliever and a guy who projects out as a 4 or 5 guy in a rotation that already has 4 or 5 guys? So the biggest moment was a Pirate saying, screw you to Neil, and now he's in this precarious situation where he is either going to do something stupid to make just to make a trade that makes his team no better, or he's going to come out and he's going to start talking to us about, how he doesn't want to corrupt the future, blah, 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 and this team ends up 4 games over 500 because he didn't believe enough in it to make the move. This is, again, one of the weaknesses of this general manager, and why a talented team that looked like it had an endless future ended up having that future cut after 3 years. Gary.
So this is my prediction. This is my moment of the week.
This is your moment of the week.
I think Carpenter's weekend in Chicago was amazing. The 3 home runs he hit, the 6 home runs in straight games, and all that stuff, and the game we had the 5 extra base hits. To me, that was an amazing weekend for one guy. That park we know the ball flies out of, but to me, you don't see that very often. You didn't see that in 1930 when the ball was juiced. You didn't see it in the late 90s. What a stretch of games. It really didn't do much for the Cardinals necessarily in the pennant race, but I can't remember the last time I saw something like that. I don't know about you guys. He had two games over the weekend. We had 3 home runs. He homered in 6 straight games. That's pretty amazing, for a guy that really had been struggling all year. I thought the Bucs 9-game winning streak, I didn't think through or realize that, now that you mentioned about the conflict that Huntington has, you're probably right. And, I don't know. Hopefully he's got the guts. I'm not sure either one of those guys. Gaussman pitches in that's one of the junkiest ballparks in the majors, particularly left center. But on the other hand, he's been bad for 2 years in a row now. And, Gibbons has a good arm, but I'm not really sure they put him over the top. I would hope he would have the courage to say in that, Dave, I think we're going to go with what we got. Let's see where these guys go. We climbed back in it. They did something right there, and let's do it. I wouldn't be giving away top prospects for either one of those guys. I'm with you. And I think the only other thought I have, so I guess my first would have been Carpenter's weekend in Chicago and that stretch of 6 games and then the Bucs 9-game winning streak. But over the weekend, one of the guys in boxing who, quite frankly, speaks very well, doesn't pull all this WWF nonsense, comes from a pretty good family, and is a damn good fighter. A guy by the name of Mike Garcia. He got in there against a tough opponent, Robert Easter, at lightweight on Saturday night. It was a tough contest. Easter did pretty well in the first 6 minutes, but although Garcia was much naturally smaller, he had a dominating performance, and at the end of the fight, in the interviews, again, he was a class guy all the way. So to me, that was a memorable moment of the week. Boxing needs more guys like this guy. So if you guys watch boxing or anyone does, they should probably tune in when Mike Garcia fights. Those would be my 3 for the week.
All right. Mr. Fletcher.
Well, while we weren't looking, a baseball record was set this past week. And it's a stupid one, boys, and it's a sign of what's wrong with the league. It's taken something that was really ultra cool, and it's taken the shine off of it. 41 position players have pitched in the big league games this season. That's a new record.
Oh,
so by my count, 28 different position players have taken the mound since the start of June. Since June. This is way too many. A good thing. It used to be fun. It was great. It's a blowout. You're going to throw somebody in there like that. So I was thinking about it, and why is this happening? And a lot of it is going to be attributed to the rise of the corresponding drop in innings pitch per appearance by starting pitchers. I mean, Gary, you talked about that.
Yep.
Well, teams are carrying far more relievers than they ever have before, but they actually carry far fewer swingmen or the mop-up guys. And rather on teams focusing on maximum effort, they're going to those high-velocity relievers who can go 1 or 2 innings tops, and then that requires them, the catchers and the utility guys, to help do the mopping up that the actual pitchers used to do. And the worst one of them all, guys, there was a game where they had 2 position players pitch more than half of a whole game. With Daniel Descalzo and Alex Avila did for the Diamondbacks earlier this month. That's crazy. So here's what the pace is. Think about this, fellas. MLB is on pace for 66 position players making pitching appearances in 2018. The previous record was last year with 32.
Holy gosh. Wow. That is amazing.
I mean, it's offensive in a way when you think about it.
It is.
It really is. I mean, it's almost offensive. You got 13-man pitching staffs, but you're babying these guys so much, or you're letting them just rear back in a 7-0 game or a 9-1 game. You're letting them rear back and try to show, how big their arm is. Like, I mean, you would think that these organizations would say, what are you doing? Like, I mean, what's wrong with you? Like, you got to pitch for 6 months here. I mean, you got 13-man pitching staffs, I'm going to guess, of the 30, I don't know how many, there's 30, you got 13-man pitching staffs probably on 24 of the 30 teams. And then you're right, Fletch, then you got to go to 66 position players pitching by July 31st. I mean, it just, you would think somebody around baseball, and again, our fearless leader would say, well, what's going on here? What are you people doing here?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, the problem is, and that trickles down a little bit. So you're not seeing as many balls being put in play, which is a problem with, it's all or nothing. And it's not you have the shifts, it's not an entertaining game. And the fact that, you've done this with your pitching staffs, when I saw that stat, I was flabbergasted. I could not believe it.
I honestly didn't realize there was that many. That's amazing. I knew there was a bunch. There was a rash lately, but I didn't realize there was that many.
Yeah. I mean, the other things you adjust to, the shifts and such, but that's just embarrassing. I mean, that to me is it's like putting Casey Hampton at quarterback.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, that many times. Yes.
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It's, again, a leader needs to run this league and improve the product. The product isn't good right now. Product's not good when you're going to have on pace to have more strikeouts and hits in a year.
And there's a bunch of teams with that too, Dave. I mean, even good teams. I mean, the Dodgers have that situation, I think.
Last week I had seen that where baseball is on track for that as a whole. That's embarrassing.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, improve your damn product. There's no reason for that. It's the metrics, the launch angle, stop it.
Well, here's the other thing that happened. Remember what happened the last time that happened? That's how, remember Jose Canseco pitched that one time and blew his arm out. And that put a kibosh on that for a while. So maybe that's what you need to have one of these position players blow up, and that'll do it.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, Hernandez pitched here for the Dodgers. He's pretty valuable to them as a multi-position. I mean, I understand the need for multi-position players when you're carrying this many pitchers, but they put him in the 16th inning. I think he had played most of the game at that point. There was a prime example of taking that risk, Fletch. You're right. And, that wouldn't have been good. That would not have been good. Now, I don't think he was quite so goofy about trying to throw the ball 100 miles an hour.
Right.
But still, I mean, that's just not a. I don't know. To me, that's a circus. Baseball doesn't need circuses like that. And if I'm the leadership there, I'd say, we're not going to do this. You're not going to be able to do this. I mean, you're going to have to figure out something else.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the umpire's problem. A guy shouldn't be out there throwing a ball 98 miles an hour in a 9-0 game. And if he is, you think a pitching coach would say, what are you doing? We rely on you. What are you doing here? Well, that's how I do it. Well, no, that's not how you do it. Okay? We need your arm in September. So shouldn't be doing stuff like this. So staggering number, Fletch. That's pretty good research. That's amazing. I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was that bad. So
now our last is going to be our bold predictions of the week. I'm gonna look at I just looked at a report that came out not long before we started this, where the Pirates have emerged as a surprising entrance in the market for Rays right-hander Chris Archer. Now, for the first time since I can remember, Neil Huntington, the rumors floating around is he's willing to trade some top prospects. Believe in this team. This team at the beginning of the year was an 84-win team, and I think that's what it's playing to right now. It's playing as an 84-win team. It has the talent for that. You have a minor league system that is full of good middle infield prospects. Trade them. Believe in this team. Get a guy who can be on this team like a Chris Archer, like a Keon Keela, that are going to make this team better for the next 3 or 4 years. Stop doing what you're doing. These guys are affordable. You can put them on the team. You can do it. But my bold prediction is, like the David Price situation a few years ago, he's going to come up and say that he's made his best offers and it just wasn't good enough. I'm happy he wasn't in a position to trade a Dickerson or any of the other certain bandied around. Or although I kind of wish somehow he would have traded Mercer and Cervelli, but that's another topic for another day. But my prediction is he does nothing. But I plead with him to go out and do something. You are in contract negotiations next year for a TV deal. What would be the problem with spending a little extra money now to get the fans pumped up again? I was at the game on Sunday, on Saturday. I mean, the fans are fired up again, and you could increase your ratings by making a little investment now, and making that television contract a little more palatable for AT&T and sports. But bold prediction is he's not going to do it. Team can't survive the injuries, ends up 80-82 win team at the best, and people get pissed off at the end of the year. Fletch.
Well, my predictions are going to revolve around the Steelers, and my prediction is that Mason Rudolph is going to turn some heads at Latrobe. You know, you think about it, guys. He's the next franchise quarterback in the city, and there's no point in waiting for him to see the field as circumstances arise. Instead of relying on, Jones or Dobbs to keep this team afloat should something happen to Roethlisberger, Rudolph can come in, I think, and keep this team competitive. It's the difference between staying in the playoff race and keeping up with the best in the league. The Steelers, they're not going to be in the middle of the pack if their starting QB goes down, and, Jones, Dobbs keeps you in the middle of the pack. Mason Rudolph may be able to lift you above that if something, God forbid, something happens.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I got the opportunity to see him a couple times with Oklahoma State and against the Panthers. And unlike Landry Jones, who was a system quarterback, and often those don't translate well to the NFL, this guy has an arm. This guy has an accurate arm. This guy's a hell of a passer, and this guy's cool under pressure. I agree with you. I think that's a hell of a call on his part, and I was pumped up the Steelers. Although Ben whined about it, I was pumped up the Steelers made that pick. And short of the number one draft pick, who may be good, but probably wasn't a number one draft pick, I think they had a hell of a draft myself. And I think Rudolph, to me, is probably going to end up being the key to it. Gary.
I mean, there's two big baseball series coming up, and we are Pittsburgh guys, and we're talking about a Pittsburgh show here. The Cubs are coming into Pittsburgh. I tend to agree with you. I have a feeling the Pirates are not going to do that much at the deadline, but I just get the feeling that I don't love the Cubs. It's hard to like some of those guys, but it's a pretty good team. We'll see in this particular series if Pittsburgh goes in and kicks their ass in 3 games. I would change my tune, but I just have a feeling in 2 series. That series coming up this week, and Houston goes to Los Angeles in the World Series rematch last year. And even though I'm a Dodger fan, I don't think the Dodgers just lost that series because the bullpen got tired. I think Houston was better, And I think the Cubs are better than the Pirates are. And I just think in those two series, I think we're going to see that. I don't know if there'll be sweeps, but I get the feeling the Cubs and Houston are going to send a message like, you know what, we're the teams you got to beat, and we're going to show you that. And I have a feeling that both of those series, Houston and the Cubs, are going to win it. So that's my fearless prediction coming up for the next week or until we do that.
Well, we're going to do one last quick feature here. Book Unlucky 21 got a chapter from each of you this week. Gary, outstanding research, outstanding job on the Con Lewis fight, the loss by the Pittsburgh kid Billy Conn, and correlating that with the Michael Moore loss to George Foreman. Outstanding job with that. I know people are going to just be real happy when they read your assessment of that. Really interesting take.
Thanks, Dave.
And Fletch?
Very much.
Just the lead article in the book, Unlucky 21, the 21 number 21s that have tragically passed away in Pittsburgh sports history. Just what a phenomenal take you took on that whole situation. Just enjoyed reading the hell out of it.
Well, Dave, I went the extra mile for you, buddy.
Well,
I actually met with a numerologist to get some background on this whole number 21 and what it means. Eugene, the numerologist.
I like it. No, I thought they were both just riveting, great write-ups, and I just wanted to personally thank you both for it. And right now I have all but about 5 or 6 chapters set in there, and the book's going to be a beast, but it's going to be just over 300 compelling pages. So I'm real excited for this, which we're looking at a September 1st, 15th publication date on it. With all the proceeds, I had the opportunity myself this Thursday. Sean Gibson, who's the head of the Josh Gibson Foundation, which the proceeds of the book is going to, he invited me down to the foundation on Thursday. And let me tell you, the work he was doing with those camps with kids that really are getting a lot of structure out of this and just doing a phenomenal job with trying to help kids reach their potential. It was just, I was pleased that we put the money in the right charity when I saw the work he was doing. Just absolutely phenomenal job, and you just look at the faces of the kids there, and they're just happy. They're getting a lot out of this, and then he takes it to the next level with teaching the kids the business of sports with a couple of programs he does through the city schools and Robert Morris University, where he's saying, okay, you know, some of you can make money in sports by playing, but the majority of you, here's the business of sports. We're going to teach you this, and we're going to try to give you opportunities in this, which again is just phenomenal job he does with those as you look over it. But probably my favorite time of the trip, I'm saying to myself, God, I want to get a picture of the Josh Gibson historical marker. I got to remember to ask him. And I keep forgetting to ask him. And I'm walking to my car at the end. He's walking down, and I look up and I laugh my ass off because as I'm opening my passenger side to get something out of it, I run into the Josh Gibson historical marker that's sitting right against my car. But just, if you've never had the chance to see the phenomenal stuff these guys do, joshgibson.org is their website, and just be amazed at what he does. Fletch, I believe you've known Sean, and just a real good guy.
Yeah, he is an absolutely great guy, and he's stepping up and helping the community. So when you talked about that's where the proceeds are going, I was very happy.
Good.
And glad to be part of it. Again, thanks. Glad to be doing it. Glad to be doing it with you guys again, and glad to be part of it. So,
it's just the book is looking good. I know you talk about CTE. There's going to be a wonderful chapter on Mike Webster in there. Fletch and
well, that's a hint for me to get writing, isn't it? Oops.
It'll get there. It'll get there, man. And Gary did a wonderful job on the 93, and you made me look at it that maybe it was a little more predictable than we all remember. And I thought
it's funny when you do these things. It's interesting when you start putting the time in it, and you start looking at it back, particularly extended. I mean, Con Lewis was harder because I didn't see that, obviously, but the Penguin one, when you go back and look at it, it wasn't quite the surprise. Only one team beat the Penguins 3 times that year. It was the Islanders.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that. So,
well, you will both be surprised. There is going to be a Mark Franz sidelight in this thing about his trip with Frank Katz to the 1981 NIT championship, the last known time that Duquesne was a national player. And in it, he talks about Frank Katz, and Frank Katz does something unique at this game. And
I'm ready for that.
You have to find the book to find out. So, but again, thank you guys. Wonderful job. I just wanted to mention the job you did on your chapters and how I just enjoyed so much reading it, and I think people are going to love, especially the Con chapter and Fletch, the lead chapter with the Unlucky 21. I mean, it really emphasizes the inspiration for the name of the book. Captures it well, and as I said, you mix just great drama, great memories with humor in it too. I mean, people are going to learn that number 27 is unlucky, and I won't mention why. But
I can't wait to read it myself now.
But anyways, great job, guys. We will meet here again next week, and I also want to thank Fletcher, who incited the girl who took bacon away from me. I'm not sure if I had the chance to talk about this, but the girl who took bacon away from me, betting me on Croatia beating my beloved England. Right. Fletcher kind of poked the bear a little bit on Facebook, making her do a double or nothing. Okay, a double or nothing on the World Cup final with me taking France. So not only did I get bacon back, but Marilyn she went 3 days without coffee. She's an addict, and it was very difficult for her. But coming up on Facebook, and hopefully we'll be able to announce next week, she will be eating cold quiche and a warm Iron City Light on Facebook Live. And I'm going to dedicate that to you, Fletch, since I've been stuffing my mouth with bacon every day since.
Well, this was bigger than the both of us, Dave. There was a whole industry that I was taking care of and making sure that you had bacon again. This was economic development at its finest, fellas.
Oh, Sugardale is now up again on the stock market, trading quite nicely.
And the sign is back on regular rotation behind home plate now. I noticed at PNC.
Exactly. Yes. The world's a better place now. Oh, man. But all right, gentlemen, you have a good week.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.